Hi everyone and welcome to Creative Cakes by Sharon. Today I'm going to be making a Chicago Bulls cupcake. My son's a huge fan of the Chicago Bulls, so last year when he was left a cap under the tree by Santa, he was over the moon. So today I'm just going to borrow it to use as a guide so that I can make this cake. So let's get started. So today I'm using my son's cap as a guide for the shape and also for the logo. I've also got two 6-inch cakes here which I've cooked and cooled. I've got a little bit of chocolate ganache as well as some black fondant, white and a little bit of red. I've got my template which I'm using today, and you can find a copy of this in the description box below the video. I've got 2 pieces of wax paper as well as a board to put my final cake on. I've got a round cutter and got a lollipop stick as well as an straw, and you could use either of those. I've got my pizza cutter, X-Acto blade, offset spatula and an edible marker as well as some black food colouring and a paintbrush, and I'm going to choose later on whether I use my black edible marker or this food colouring. I've got a pair of scissors, my cake smoother and a bowl. I've got my fondant roller and some food grade string. The first thing we need to do is to cut our cakes to form the base of our hat. So with my 6-inch cake, I'm going to pop it on its side and cut it in half about an inch from the bottom. This is now the bottom layer of the cake, and I'm going to put chocolate ganache in between each of the layers, of which there'll be 3 layers. So I'm just going to pop some ganache here and smooth it right to the edges. And now with my second cake, I'm going to do exactly the same thing and turn it on its side and cut it about 1 inch up from the bottom and stack that onto the top of the cake that we're building. I'm going to fill this with some chocolate ganache and pop on one of the tops of my cakes, and it doesn't really matter which one. And then I'm going to cover the entire cake, the top and the sides, with a layer of the chocolate ganache. Once I've covered the entire cake, I'm going to pop it in the fridge for about 15 minutes to set, and I'm just going to wrap up my other cake and save that for another tutorial. Now I'm going to work on the logo for the cap, and here you can see this has got black stitching at the edge, but I'm going to create a white background for this. So I'm just going to roll out my white fondant to about 2 to 3 mils thick, and then once I've rolled it out, I'm going to transfer it onto a piece of wax paper so that it doesn't stick after I've cut out the template. So once I've positioned my template onto the white fondant, I'm just going to use my X-Acto blade and carefully cut around the template. Take your time in doing this so you can get a nice sharp edge, and if you find that your fondant underneath is dragging, it may be because it's a little bit too moist. So if you just let it sit in the air for a minute or 2, it will stiffen up just enough so that you'll be able to use your blade and the fondant has a better chance of staying in position. When you're done, remove the template very gently and smooth all of the edges of the bull around the horns and the face using your fingers and even your blade to get a nice smooth edge. Now I'm going to move on to the red section of the face, and you can see here that I've just folded up the horns inwards because they're white and I don't need them in the way when I'm cutting out my red fondant. So I'm just going to roll that out and again place the template on top of the fondant and gently trace around the edge of the template. I'm now going to place the red piece of fondant on top of the white to see if there's any sections that I need to fix up before I adhere it, and I'd like the white to poke out just a little bit further under the red, so I'm just going to use my finger to massage the fondant just out a little bit, just stretching it out a little bit very gently, and then reposition it. I'm also going to use my blade to trim the tiniest little amount off the edge of the red section of fondant, and then once I'm happy with the shapes, I'm going to adhere it together with a little bit of water. Now using some of the leftover red fondant, I'm just going to cut 2 tiny triangles to sit at the very pointy end of the horns of the bull. Now at this stage I decided to use my edible black marker instead of the food colouring and the paintbrush to draw in the lines and details to the face. I just felt I had a little bit more control, but if you feel confident in using the food colouring and the paintbrush, by all means use that to do this. So I'm using the template as a guide and using the back of a paintbrush to indent the fondant and use those lines as a guide on where I need to put my black marking. So I'm just gently building up the darkness in certain lines, and once I've done this, I'm then going to roll 2 tiny little balls of black fondant for the pupils of the eyes, and then the same with 2 tiny white balls of fondant, and then I'm just going to gently pat them down to flatten them a little bit and cut off the tops to get a nice straight edge, and then adhere the whites and the blacks of the eyes. Now I'm just going to roll out a teeny tiny little snake of black fondant and put it at the bottom of the little triangles on either horn. Now that I've finished the logo, I don't want to keep it totally flat because it will harden in this shape, so I want to pop it just up against a round bowl. I'm just going to tuck the wax paper just under the bowl and let it rest just gently until I'm ready to attach it to the cake. Now we're going to move on to covering the actual cake. So I've got the black fondant out here, and I'm going to roll it to about 3 to 4 mil thick, and I'm going to roll it into a big enough circle that it's going to cover the entire cake. Then I'm just going to gently roll the fondant onto my roller and position my cake in front of me, and then drape the fondant over the cake very gently. And then I'm going to start smoothening out all of the fondant. So to do this on a round cake, you basically just keep lifting up the edges and working downwards with your palm, flattening the fondant as you go. You can see that you get these frill-like effects, so you just open up the frill and flatten down. So I'm going to keep doing that until I'm happy with the sides of my cake, and then trim off all of the excess fondant. Now I'm going to cut a length of string which is long enough to go from one side of my cake right over the top and down the other side, and then I'm going to use it to score a line on the tops and sides of my cake to create the seams. So I'm going to do this 2 more times so that I've got 6 sections of the cap. To create the little stitched holes in the tops of the caps, I'm using a round cutter or the top of a round tip nozzle, and then to create the center of the hole, I'm just pressing the fondant with my lollipop stick. At this stage, I'm going to adhere my logo onto the cap because I don't want it to sit on the side too long and harden up too much so that when it gets onto the cap it's going to crack. So I'm just going to adhere it to the cake. I've just now got a little ball of black fondant which I'm rolling into a sort of a flat circle, and I'm going to adhere that to the very top point of the cap, and I think this is a little button that you find on most caps. I'm not sure if it's got a real name, but there we go. Now I'm going to cut out the little round section at the back, so with my offset spatula I'm just going to mark a semicircle and then press into the cake on an angle and scoop out this little bit of cake. Then with a little bit of black rolled fondant, I'm going to press it into the cake to cover this section. Now I'm going to gently transfer the cake onto the board. At last now I can work on the visor, so I'm going to roll out my black fondant, fairly thick this time, roughly about 5 millimeters thick, and then I'm going to trace my visor template. And then with my pizza cutter, I'm just going to score some lines at the top of the visor, and this is going to act as the stitching. And once I've done this, I'm just going to gently place the visor up against the base of my cap. And to give it a bit of an old worn look, I'm going to take the template piece which I used for the visor. I'm going to roll it into a little oblong shape and pop it under the cap. The fondant will dry in this shape. And then I'm going to finally make 2 bands for the back of the cap by cutting 2 strips of black fondant, and with one of the strips I'm just going to make one end a little bit round, and then with my lollipop stick I'm going to indent a series of holes and then attach it to the back of the cap. And here's the finished product. I can tell you without a doubt that my son absolutely loved this Chicago Bulls cap, and I'm sure that any other Chicago Bulls fan will love it just as much. So guys, if you enjoyed this tutorial, I'd love it if you could give it a like and share it with your friends. I do love hearing from you guys, so please leave me a message in the comment section below. And I also love seeing photos of cakes that you've created, so drop me a photo at my Facebook page, which is Creative Cakes by Sharon. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more creative cake tutorials. And once again, thanks for watching. Take care.